Yo, what's up guys, Grim here, and welcome to my Soulwrest Necromancer League Start Guide. So this guide is going to be a little bit different than what you're probably seeing everywhere else. I'm going to take you through the journey from Twilight Strand all the way to Maven and taking her down. The steps you need to take, the intricacies that you'll need to have of the build, and how it all comes together and works. So I prepared a bunch of material for you guys to make sure this all goes smoothly, but let's first of all highlight the build and the strengths, weaknesses, everything you guys need to know. So, to begin with, alright, disclaimer, this is a more advanced build, and if you're a complete beginner, it may not be the best for you. We'll go into why that is in a little bit. Alright, so to start things off, the intention behind this build is that it is an Atlas Annihilator. Its whole purpose in life is to destroy the Atlas and progress through it as fast as possible. The advantage of this build is that it has an incredible power curve. It's strong all the way through all of the acts, through early maps on low to no gear, and then once you get some good items, it really does scale out of control in endgame bosses, which you're seeing a little bit of in the background here. And if you want to see more of what the boss looks like against, the build looks like against bosses, check out some of my other videos, specifically my most recent one before this one, and you'll get to see a ton of the endgame bosses in action. Alright, let's get into why it's not a beginner build. So, there's a few different reasons that this is, but the primary reason is that there is a few skill transitions that you need to go through. You're going to start off in the acts as a skeleton necromancer, and then once you hit maps and in the late acts, you're going to transition into a skeleton and carrion golem hybrid. And then towards the end game, when you finally acquire the Soulwrest staff, you'll need to make a final transition into a Soulwrest Necromancer. Now these aren't necessarily hard, but it can be a little bit intimidating and confusing if you're a brand new player, so definitely make sure that you're comfortable with the skill gem system in Path of Exile before picking up this build. The second point is that this build requires a chase item, a Soulwrest staff. Now to give you guys a bit of perspective, this is a rare item. There was only 50 available on day one of the previous league ultimatum, and that is definitely a short supply. However, of course, after day one, if you're still looking to play the build, you're going a bit slower, you're not that ambitious, you can pick up the staff for a lot cheaper as there becomes more and more of them available. It is a global drop. It's just a bit of a rarer global drop. If you're trying to push the Atlas hard and do day one bosses and stuff like that, that might hold you back. But if you're your average player and you kind of get to like endgame bosses, 4 or 5 days in, then it's just going to be fine. The staff won't be too expensive. But if you're trying to push the envelope, you're trying to get those early bosses and blast the Atlas as fast as possible, this may be something that requires you to have a bit of an understanding of the Path of Exile economy and how to make 3 or 4 exalts on the early stages of the league, as it may be expensive early before it drops in price due to more supply being available. So both of those facts do combine to kind of make the build a little bit more advanced than your average build guide. So that's kind of the primary one there. Let's move on to the next point. So I mentioned that this build is designed to push bosses. It is a bossing build. It has okay map clear, which you can see in some of my other videos, but it primarily is a bossing build. It excels at doing Shaper, Uber Elder, Maven, but what it really does well is double Guardian influenced maps with the Maven witnessing them, and then also it can then do the Maven invitations based on the Guardians, and that's going to yield an incredible amount of currency and economic wealth for you. If you can farm those Guardian invitations all day, like pump them and dump them, and get the craftable watchstones, the Maven writs, and all sorts of stuff like that, and sell that on to other players, you're going to be absolutely stacked. And that really does bring me to my next point. This character is not able to transition into an Omega endgame scaling monster. So if you're the kind of guy who wants one character, or the kind of gal, then this isn't really for you. It's kind of a disposable character that is an absolute beast for clearing the early game and the end game bosses, but then it kind of caps out at around, you know, a pretty low amount of gear, and you have to move on to a new build to really start to push, you know, the Delirium, you know, and the Simulacrum and all sorts of stuff like that. In terms of the actual new league mechanic, I think it's going to be a very, very good pick. It's got just enough defenses that you're going to be able to get through most map content without dying, and it has enough of a buffer that you can survive 1 or 2 hits from stuff like Maven and Minotaur and stuff like that. But again, a big disclaimer here, it is not a tanky build. It is definitely more on the glass cannon side of things. If I had to rate it, it's probably about a 4 out of 10 on the tankiness. It has about 7,500 maximum hit from a physical hit. And to kind of put that in perspective, a lot of endgame bosses hit for around 8,000 physical damage. So it's definitely not a very forgiving character if you're not familiar with the endgame mechanics of Path of Exile's endgame bosses. So if you have never done Shaper before, or you've never done Cirrus before, this character might be a bit risky and you may want to go with a tankier pick. Alright, there it is guys, that is going to be our intro. Let's get in game and start explaining the build. Alright, boot up Path of Exile here, and here we are with the character. We're going to explain the very end game build here first, and then we're going to move back, and then we'll explain leveling, the transitions, and all sorts of stuff like that that's going to get you to this point. The character I'm playing here is fully capable of all endgame content, assuming you understand the boss mechanics at play and you're able to dodge mechanics effectively. It doesn't have enough health to tank stuff, but it will have enough damage to absolutely blitz most of the content. Alright, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. So the build primarily revolves around the Soulwrest staff. You can see it's in a 5-link here because I was simulating the upcoming damage nerf, but traditionally this operates as a 6-linked item without having to link it, one of the big advantages of this build. So while the staff will be expensive at about 4 exalts, I'm guessing, it will come pretty much automatically 6-linked for the purposes of your build. So the important line here on Soulwrest is that it mentions that it triggers level 20 Phantasm skill when you consume a corpse. So a Phantasm is a type of minion that is summoned and does a ranged spell-based physical attack. And it does incredible damage, and it does, you know, pretty much exactly what you would expect. So in order to summon Phantasms, I'll kind of show you guys what it looks like here. So if you, for example, have corpses on the ground, which can either be spawned by slaying monsters or by desecrating, that's a spell that you can equip to your character. We'll get into that in a second. And then when you detonate those corpses, which we'll be doing with either Flesh Offering for more damage or Bone Offering if you want to go more defensive, it summons out Phantasms, which you can see here. Are these little ghosty guys here that fly around. Now you can have a maximum of 20 Phantasms, 10 of which come from the Soulwrest staff, and 10 of which come from the Summon Phantasm support. If you get a 21 Summon Phantasm support, you can technically have 21 of them, which is a 5% more damage buff to your build, but traditionally most people are going to have 20. So, of course, you have the 10 from the Summon Phantasm on the staff, which you can see there, and you also have the 10 from the Summon Phantasm on the support gem. And those two combine to make one skill of 20. So, on the staff, any skill gem that is socketed into the staff is going to support the Summon Phantasm ability. They don't need to be linked, they just directly support what it's linked in. We're currently using a single target based setup, using Elemental Focus, Controlled Destruction, Cold Penetration, and Predator, but the exact links you're going to want to use are going to be in the path of building, which we'll go over in just a minute here, and will also be in the description below. If you want to go for massive ease of mapping and also bossing, you're going to need to acquire 2 Soulwrest staffs so that you can weapon swap on the fly and allow your minions to be augmented by different skill gems. So you can see here we have very offensive based skill gems here, all designed for big single target damage. When you go for a different setup though, it's going to enable you to have massive AoE clear. So you're going to need to have either a gem swap, which you'll be swapping out the green gems in your character. You'll go for less and more of the projectiles and faster projectiles, you'll swap them out, and that'll all be in the path of building. And basically the essential thing is that if you're needing to do big damage, you're going to need to do a gem swap, and if you have the money and you could acquire 2 of the staffs, you can mitigate that gem swap by swapping weapons instead, which you can do with a hotkey. And it makes it really, really quick and makes it so you speed up your clearing potential quite a lot. Of course, that does elevate the cost of the build quite a lot, but it's huge quality of life, and it's something that you can work towards fairly quickly. Once you get into the end game, after you get your first staff, it's going to be pretty easy to get the second one because you're going to be doing all the end game bosses and making a ton of money. So that's that to start things off. Alright, so Soulwrest is very, very powerful, but it's only powerful because of all the supporting minions you have at your disposal. Let's go over Carrion Golems first. So Carrion Golem essentially is a golem that adds additional flat physical damage to your army of minions, and that's basically the only purpose he serves on the surface. You're going to be linking him with either a Feeding Frenzy or a Culling Strike support gem. In this case, we're using Culling Strike because we have a Hungry Loop, but most time, and also, when we're talking about this in general, you'll be using a Feeding Frenzy support to grant your Phantasms and yourself Feeding Frenzy, and that's what's going to be displayed in the path of building, which is pretty handy. The next minion I want to talk about here is the Summon Spectres. So these Summon Spectres are actually Host Chieftains and Carnage Chieftains. These Chieftains can be acquired in Act 7, the Ashen Fields, which you can pick up by using Desecrate in the Ashen Fields. I'll show you guys what that looks like. And their purpose is to grant all of your minions and yourself power and frenzy charges, which is a massive more damage multiplier to your build, and it's going to be very, very effective at juicing up your damage. So if you Desecrate over here and you use the special corpse targeting key, which you can set in the settings, you can target corpses and raise them as specters. So this is where you come if they die, or if you need to acquire them for the first time, you can come and do that there. A quick tip for you guys is that, once you acquire your chieftains, you can come into your hideout, and because they're saved in your specter bank, anytime you Desecrate in your hideout, you'll also get those specific corpses for you to re-raise them really quickly, which can be really handy when you're doing stuff like the Feared in endgame and they might die. Okay, so the final one we'll talk about here is Summon Skitterbots. So Summon Skitterbots are essentially a massive damage multiplier as well. When you combine them with Bone Chill, which is supporting them here, it makes it so all of the chill effect becomes almost like an increased damage effect, so it's very, very powerful. But in addition to that, they also shock targets and apply the chill required to apply Hypothermia, which is a damage link that we'll be using and you'll see in Path of Building for our single target setup. So Skitterbots are incredibly important, and having them at your disposal is going to be very, very good. Now, we also use a number of auras to power up our minions. So the first aura we're going to talk about here is Zealotry. Zealotry gives you increased spell crit, more damage, and overall is going to make your Phantasms deal an incredible amount more of damage. And in addition to that, we also use Hatred. Hatred gives you additional physical damage as cold, and also more cold damage on top of that, and our guys deal spell physical based damage. So Zealotry and Hatred are really, really good, and they're going to turbocharge your guys' damage. Now, an important thing to note with your build, if you feel like you're not doing a lot of damage for some reason, that's probably because you're not in range of your Phantasms with your auras. The auras on this build make up about 60 to 70% of the actual damage of the build, so if you're not near your minions enough, then you're not going to be getting anywhere near as much damage as you otherwise should be. So make sure you're positioned somewhat near your Phantasms so that you can grant them Zealotry as well as Hatred. Very, very important there. Now, it's actually absolutely critical that you acquire a Victario's Influence as soon as possible to socket these cold and spell-based auras into, as it gives you a ton of reduced aura effect, reduced aura reservation, which is essentially going to allow you to run the 3 auras in the first place: Skitterbots, Hatred, and Zealotry. It also gives you a ton of aura effect and makes it so that your auras are supported by level 30 Generosity, which means they don't apply to you, but they apply to your minions at incredibly increased effect, turbocharging your minions' cold and spell damage a lot. Alright, now, I mentioned that the Soulwrest Phantasms primarily deal physical-based damage. We don't want it to be physical-based damage because we're missing out on damage from Hatred, as well as other elemental advantages such as cold penetration and stuff like that. So we want to convert all the damage that we have to cold damage, and we do that through the Triad Grip Gloves. Making sure that the Triad Grip Gloves have 4 green sockets on them is a priority, and it's going to make it so all of our minions deal 100% cold damage and take advantage of stuff like cold penetration and elemental equilibrium. When we get to that, I'll explain that then, but it's a massive damage multiplier, and I'll show you guys what that looks like in Path of Building. All right. So we're going to talk briefly about Abyss Jewels here, but then we'll go into more detail later on in Path of Building. So you can see here we're using a Darkness Enthroned, which is essentially the best in slot belt early on, and it's incredibly common. It's a lot of bang for your buck, and they'll be available easily on day one for, probably 4 or 5 chaos. The only other unique we're using here is the Jinxed Juju Citrine Amulet. This essentially gives you a ton of curse effect. The curse we're using is Sniper's Mark, which really does juice up the damage of your Phantasms, and this makes it so it gets even more effect, but the primary reason is that it gives you a ton of survivability, as 10% of the damage you take is taken from Spectres first, and Spectres are going to be very durable in this build overall. And we'll go over why that is in a little bit there when we really nail down all of the links of this build and why we use them. The other unique here we're using won't be present in the Path of Building, but it's definitely an endgame option that we'll talk a little bit about at the end of this guide, and it does provide you with a lot of cool bonuses that we will get into a little bit later. All the rest of the gear is rare and will just need to contain life and resistances, but we'll also talk about that a little bit in Path of Building. So let's get into the Path of Building and we'll go over what really makes this build tick and understand kind of what we're dealing with here. Okay, so we're going to go into the skills first, and then we're going to go over kind of what you're looking at in the Path of Building so you can follow along. So in our helmet here, we have the Ray Spectre, and we've linked it with Life Tap, Minion Life, and Meat Shield. This is essentially going to make the Spectres, which are the apes, incredibly beefy and tanky, and it's also going to make it so that when they cast their ability to grant your army frenzy and power charges, it's based off of their life, which is easily regeneratable, and not their mana. If you base it off their mana, it's going to basically run out, and you won't get that many frenzy and power charges. So it must be linked to Life Tap on your Spectres, and giving them additional life is really important. All right, let's get to the body armor. So this is going to be your primary setup for your auras, basically your Skitterbots auras, and also your Carrion Golem. So primarily, you don't need to have this 5 linked. It just probably is more ideal to have it on like 3 2 links, honestly. So the Skitterbots need to be linked to Bone Chill, and the Carrion Golem needs to be linked to Feeding Frenzy to give you Feeding Frenzy and your army Feeding Frenzy. If you take a look at the damage here, Feeding Frenzy is a big deal, so having it is critical. So we need to link that. And then finally, we need to have both our Hatred and Zealotry in the body armor so that you get the reduced reservation effect of the body armor itself. In our boots, we're actually using an Arcanist brand, and this is how you automate the process of actually summoning the Phantasms. Instead of just having to use Desecrate and Flesh Offering over and over again, you're able to place an Arcanist brand on the enemy instead, and it does that all for you while also applying an incredibly important elemental effect, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But if I just jump in a quick map here and show you guys kind of what that ends up looking like, I can demonstrate quite easily why Arcanist brand is incredibly powerful. So we're on our AoE setup here. Let's jump in, and you guys can kind of get a look at what this Arcanist brand playstyle will kind of look like. So my zombies might take out a few of the enemies here, but maybe I can get some of them up. You can see here, yep, so it's automatically triggering now, and I already have 15 Phantasms just by using brands. And you're basically going to spam this Arcanist brand all the time. Whenever you go into a pack, you're going to spam that brand out, and it's going to get you a lot of Phantasms. You may get to a point where you reach a critical mass of Phantasms and they kill everything before your brands get a chance to trigger. That's okay. You'll eventually kind of go back down and they'll start popping up again, but that's the general play style, and the Arcanist brand is an incredible easy way to play this build, and it's going to make it really smooth, and as soon as you transition to Phantasm, you should include the Arcanist brand, in my opinion. Alright, let's jump back into PoB. Okay, let's get into the gloves. So in the gloves, we're forced to have 4 green, and we don't really have too much use for green sockets in this build. So we're actually got 2 open sockets here. They must be green, but you guys can do whatever you want with them. I decided to go with a Dash and a Sniper's Mark. Dash is an incredible movement ability, which helps you get out of endgame boss abilities like on Aziri, Uber Elder, and all sorts of stuff like that. And Sniper's Mark is the best curse to support Phantasms with, so you're going to go with that instead. So when you're using your curse though in game, and you're on the single target setup, you'll be using Predator as well. Predator is a support gem that essentially allows you to designate a target it will take increased damage from your minions, and it will also be the focus of that minion which is linked to it, and it will only attack the predator target, meaning that you can prioritize stuff like Aziri clones so you don't let your minions die to reflect, but you know, overall it's an incredible power, but you must apply it. So I like to basically essentially apply my curse and predator at the same time, and I press the 2 keys on my target at once, so I get a curse out there and I also get predator. But you do have to hard curse your curse with your keys, so that is what it is, but it is not too bad, and it's a very, very powerful curse, and it does require you to do it, but you know, it's good. All right, let's get into the next one here. So the first one is your one of your unset rings. So this is going to be basically what's going to have in there. It'll be Convocation. Convocation is incredibly important to spam on cooldown if you can. It increases the life of your minions by giving them regen, but it also is important later on for triggering out Abyss Jewels, which we'll talk about when we get to Jewels. The second ring I'm using here has a Clarity. We'll talk a little bit about this when we get to Mana Sustain, but this is something that you can include and something that you can also decide to exclude. We don't know how brutal the mana changes are going to be in 3.15 yet, but you do have the option to include Clarity if you want, and you don't want to go for the Hungry Loop in the end game, which we'll talk about at the end as well. Alright, so you have 2 different weapon setups at your disposal. One for single target, which you're going to be using for endgame bosses, and one for AoE, which is suitable for map clear. Let's talk about the map clear one first. So Phantasms have pretty bad projectile speed and also very, very bad clear without supporting skill gems. So you're going to need to put lesser multiple projectiles and faster projectiles on them in order to get the most amount of damage for them. Otherwise, you're going to run into some issues overall. In addition to that, we're also using Control Destruction, Minion Damage, Summon Phantasm, which is required to get the 20 Phantasms, and also Elemental Focus. Overall, you can choose to sub out Elemental Focus if you're worried about enemies with undeath effects. You can sub that out for something else if you would like. However, the most damage is going to come from Elemental Focus and this gem setup. Definitely play around with it a little bit if you want, and let me know if you find a better setup. I'm definitely always open to suggestions. The single target setup will consist of Predator, which we talked about earlier, where you mark a target, Minion Damage, Cold Penetration, Elemental Focus, Summon Phantasm, and Hypothermia. So you can see here that we have Predator in instead of Control Destruction. If you don't want to use Predator, you can put Control Destruction in there, but you will lose significant single target damage. Overall, the only other 2 gem swaps are the 2 greens. You swap out the less multiple projectiles and faster projectiles for Cold Penetration and Hypothermia, and you'll need to do that whenever you require big single target damage. But once you get the 2 staves, then you can just have a weapon swap, and you basically have the best of both worlds all the time on demand. Alright, that's going to pretty much cover all of the items there. Let's quickly talk about Flasks in 3.15, and then we'll move on to the jewels, and then we'll get into the leveling. Okay, so for the flask, you're going to want to be using a Seething Life Flask. This is basically going to allow you to recover life quickly, and it's going to give you some basically recovery when you get hit by mistake in boss fights. The other one I've got here is a Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline. It's going to give you a lot of movement speed, and if you can keep it up, it's going to increase your map speed quite a lot. We don't know how flasks are going to play out quite, you know, at the end of the day in the new patch, but this is going to be a pretty good pick in my opinion, and I'm going to be trying it out as soon as I get the opportunity to do so. The other one here we have is a Quartz Flask of Heat. This is going to give you some mitigation against the freeze ailment. It's going to give you basically you're going to recover from freeze, and then you're going to have 1 second immunity if you use it correctly. You know, it is what it is, but the main thing you're getting here is phasing, which allows you to run through enemies and get a little bit more mobility. We have Rumi's Concoction on here for a bit of extra block. It's nowhere near as good as it once was, but it's still better than anything else that we can put in this slot. Finally, we have an Eternal Mana Flask of Staunching, the Enduring variety. This is going to basically give you 100 mana per second, which is basically going to allow you to sustain your Arcanist brand triggers in the end game, which is going to be incredibly important to make sure that you can still cast. So this is basically our solution to the mana changes in 3.15 and the trigger introduction of mana costs. Now, I do want to quickly cover trigger costs because it's going to be very important. So you want to keep your Desecrate and your Ball Lightning on your trigger of Arcanist Brand at level 1. You want the Flesh Offering at level 20, and you can see here the mana costs are okay. They're fairly tame compared to what the rest of the builds are dealing with, and a Mana Flask should easily sustain the upkeep of multiple Arcanist Brands in multiple fights. All right, so it's pretty good. All right, let's move on to the jewels. Okay, so a big portion of what makes this build so powerful is the cluster jewel setup that you will need to acquire. Cluster jewels aren't hard to get, and you don't really need to worry too much about them not being accessible. You just need to make sure that you're prepared to buy them, and if you need to, you're prepared to craft them if it's too early and none are available. You can craft them with alterations or chaos orbs. It's not too hard. I recommend going and checking out how to do so on Craft of Exile. It's a great support website. The two mods that you're going to look for on your large cluster jewel are Call to Slaughter and Feasting Fiends. If you can't get either of these, it's not a big deal. Just use a blind 8 passive minion damage cluster and it should be okay for the time being. It's not essential. You can clear all content without it, but it will be a nice quality of life and you should definitely look into getting it, and it's a lot more damage. Very, very good there. Make sure it's 8 passive so you don't waste any skill points, and the other 2 modifiers aren't relevant. On your first medium cluster jewel, it needs to be 5 passive or less, and what you're looking for here is Blessed Rebirth, which is mandatory, which essentially makes it so that when your minions are summoned initially, they cannot be destroyed or damaged, and that's 4 seconds of immunity. So when your phantasms are constantly being summoned by Arcanist Brand, they're basically immune to damage, and that's a big weakness of some other minion builds, and we don't have to worry about that. It's also incredibly powerful in early leveling when you play skeletons. Moving on, you can either take Renewal, which is going to be less damage, or you can take Feasting Fiends as your second modifier on your medium cluster jewel. Either of them are fine, and it's just great. Next up, you want to get another 5 passive or less, and again, you want to go for Renewal or Feasting Fiends for damage, but the other one here you want to get is Life from Death. Life from Death is an incredible defensive node, and it's essentially going to sustain your minion army almost indefinitely for the most part. So when you're casting your Arcanist Brand and it's triggering Desecrate and then Flesh Offering, it's consuming 5 corpses at a time. And it says here, regenerate 2% of life per second if a minion has died recently, and minions recover 4% of life on minion death. And minion death occurs whenever you go over the cap of phantasms. So, as I mentioned, you summon 5 phantasms at a time when you consume corpses with Flesh Offering, and if you're already at the cap of 20 and you summon 5 new ones, 5 will be killed. And that'll essentially grant you 10% life regeneration per second, which is fantastic, and it'll also give your minions 20% of their life back, and this is really, really good for sustain on your carrying golem, but also on your specters, which are notoriously annoying for dying in endgame boss fights. But on this build, you have some way to counter that, which is great. All right, a big portion of your damage is also going to come from Abyss Jewels. To kind of demonstrate this, look at the damage here, 7.3 million. Taking off 1 Abyss Jewel is going to lose 200,000 damage. So making sure you have Abyss Jewels is going to grant you a large amount of life, but also it's going to grant you a large amount of damage. Now earlier I said that we need to spam Convocation on cooldown, and that is due to the fact that all of our Abyss Jewels should have minions deal X% increased damage if you've used a minion skill recently. A minion skill is counted as Convocation, so whenever you don't have whenever you can, use Convocation, and it's going to give you a ton more damage for your army because all of your Abyss Jewels will have this on it, and it's going to basically juice your minions up to the max. So yeah, spam Convocation on cooldown. That's the primary modifiers you're looking for in your Abyss Jewels. They can just have those 2 mods. These are incredibly easy to obtain, and you're going to be able to buy them on day 1. So any amount of life, the more the better, and minions deal X% increased damage if you've used a minion skill recently. If you can't get this combination, or you're looking for a combination of mods which contains additional modifiers, so you already have these 2 but you want better, you're looking for flat cold damage to minions, or flat physical damage to minions, or if you want to go even further, you can also get cast speed on minions as well on these Abyss Jewels. Now, if you're hurting for resists and you can't find it on your gear, you can also go for a bit of resists on your Abyss Jewels as well, and that's going to be quite effective. Now, on the rest of your gear, we've talked about the uniques. Let's talk about the rares. So on your rares, the only thing you're looking for is life and resistances. The sole purpose of the rares on this build outside of unique and cluster is to get resist and life. It's pretty easy, so that's basically your only goal. Gear with that on it is pretty common, and it's definitely always sold early on. You should be able to acquire a lot of items like this on day 1, and they will be accessible to everyone for just a handful of chaos, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. And if you do fall short on resistances, you can sub some damage out off of the Ghastly Eye Jewels to kind of make up for what you're missing, which is definitely a lot of flexibility for your build. Super duper awesome there. Let's talk a little bit about Elemental Equilibrium and Avatar of Fire. So as an elemental build, you prioritize having a large amount of elemental penetration, and Elemental Equilibrium is the greatest source of this on the entire skill tree and potentially in the game. So if you take a look here, if we untick Elemental Equilibrium, we lose 2.7 million damage. That's a lot of damage. So it's actually critical to make sure that you have this node set up correctly. So our minions deal 100% cold damage. And if we can somehow trigger Elemental Equilibrium with either lightning or fire, the enemies will be losing minus 50% cold resistance, meaning we'll do a ton more damage. The way we achieve this is by speccing into Avatar of Fire on the passive skill tree, and then attaching a ball lightning to our Arcanist brand. Avatar of Fire makes all of our damage fire, and with the Arcanist brand, it's going to be casting all of the time. And when that ball lightning comes out of the Arcanist brand, it's going to hit all the enemies and deal fire damage and expose them to cold damage, meaning our minions are going to do a ton more damage, offering us a massive more damage multiplier, which is extremely powerful, and taking these two nodes is a ton of damage. Very, very good indeed. Alright, I think that pretty much covers everything on the skill tree here. Let's touch a little bit on the defenses of the build and then also the damage. So see here we have with pretty budget gear outside of the Soulwrest staff, 7.3 million DPS with all of our phantasms up and with conservative calculations. There's nothing in here which is going to be completely insane, and everything is something that you could have up 100% of the time, which is super duper awesome. So 7.3 million DPS is one of the highest probably starters that you can get your hands on, only rivaled by perhaps a miner or something along those lines, and it's definitely going to be really, really fun and good to play. To give you guys a bit of context, the Shaper has about 75 million health points, so you can absolutely rip and tear him apart with this build once you get Soulwrest. Let's take a little bit of a look at the defenses here. So you can see here on the physical side of things, with all of our stuff up, we have 8.5 thousand physical max hit. So basically, if we were to get hit, we can take 8,500 physical damage in one hit. That's pretty good. Most endgame bosses do about 8,000 physical damage without map modifiers, but that's only when we have Bone Armor and our Rumi's Concoction Flask up. Without Rumi's Concoction and without Bone Armor up, you'll see that this build is actually fairly squishy, and it only has 5,200. So that's what I mean by this being a more advanced build. It's going to take quite a lot of skill to maneuver around boss abilities and make sure you don't get one hit. This is a glass cannon build. I repeat, it is glass cannon. All right, now that we've got through all of the main points on the build here, you should have a pretty good understanding of what we're looking at in the end game, how it functions, and why we took everything. The last point here is that we do have a bit of block on the tree. We have about 30% block without roomies up. That's pretty good, and it's going to help you take a few extra hits. So pretty good there. All right, let's move on to the leveling portion of this guide, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so let's first of all start out with the very, very early game. All right, let's pull up a different path of building here, and this one is going to be the very, very start. So when you rock up on Twilight Strand, you're going to be following this cheat sheet here. Well, at least this is my cheat sheet. I'm going to be following this thing to the letter. And this is based off of TyTy Killer's Necromancer speed leveling run. I'm going to link that in the description. If you want to see what leveling this build looks like, it basically looks like his video, except slower, because we all suck. But I've made a few changes and put a lot more focus on carrying golems. He decides to go with specters. I recommend against that. Go with carrying golem instead for your single target, and make use of summon skeletons. All right. So in Act 1, you're going to kick things off with Holy Flame Totem as soon as you can get it, as well as starting at the very start with Freezing Pulse Totem. But you're going to rely mainly on Holy Flame Totem, and you're going to prioritize the links that I have here. TyTy Killer is going to explain it far better than I do, but the general gameplay is to pick up Ray Zombie. You know, you can play around with them with Vitality to sustain them. Holy Flame Totem is going to be great for slaying monsters and bosses, and then you're also going to have Flame Wall you can put down to juice up your Holy Flame Totem as well. As soon as you beat Merveil, I think it is, or someone in, maybe it's Brutus, you're going to get access to Summon Skeletons, and then eventually Infernal Legion, and that's where you're going to get absolutely hard carried by Skeletons and Infernal Legion for the rest of the campaign, and most of this is going to revolve around them. So, of course, you can follow the progression here, but the big changing point is going to be in Act 4 when you finally pick up Carrion Golem, and you're going to transition into both a Summoned Skeleton for your clear and Carrion Golem for your single target. You're going to have access to 2 Carrion Golems at this point, and they're going to do absolutely absurd damage to all the bosses and completely rip and tear it apart, and it's going to carry you all the way to Act 10. But while you're moving through the acts, after you get into Act 6, you have all skill gems open to you. And if you can secure a Triad grip, it's going to be very, very important. And I'll explain why as we go through the leveling trees here. So you can see here, we prioritize damage early on. This is going to turbocharge your skeletons as well as your zombies that you're going to be using as well early on. And it's going to make you really, really powerful. So you can follow along here. I have early, mid, and late leveling, which is going to take you all the way up to Act 10. You can see here in the mid game, you're going to pick up some dexterity from careful planning. This is a fairly common jewel. If you can't get it, just find dexterity gear instead. And by the time you're in Act 4, this is the node that gives you a second golem, and it's going to really push your leveling to the next level. Make sure you follow the links in that cheat sheet. But overall, it's going to be pretty good. Now, I did mention Triad Grip here. Let's quickly jump in and look at Triad Grip. It's a very, very important item for this build, and the sooner you get access to it, the sooner you're going to absolutely push your damage through the roof. So this is an item which drops at around level 32, and when you get it, you're going to want to color it using the bench and jewelers. So this is a pretty interesting concept for new players, but essentially if you have any item like a pair of boots or gloves, you basically want to have, I'll just show you guys what it looks like for the purpose of this guide. So if you have any amount of jewels, which are incredibly easy to obtain by selling 6 sockets, you can come to the bench and you want to basically, if it's like, let's say 2 sockets, you're gonna go 2 sockets, right? And you want to make it so it's 2 green on these 2 sockets. So you would go green. You would use your chromes, or if you don't have chromes, you can just chrome it that way yourself, or you can use the 1 green craft. Whatever works for you. Make it so that it's 2 greens here at the start, and then what you need to do is use the jeweler trick to basically make it a you go 3 back into 2. Back into 3, and then eventually it's going to roll a green socket. If you try and roll this with chromes, it's going to be incredibly difficult. So you're going to go 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3 until you finally get a green socket. Come on, let's see if we can get it. This is why you have to use this method, because you would never have any chance at getting it just normally throughout the chromatic process. It's very, very difficult. So you're going to keep doing this until you get a green socket. It can take a few, as you can see, but this is basically going to be the process that we'll all be doing playing this build at league start. Come on, give me the RNG. All right, let's go, let's go, let's go. Anyway, you're going to continue rinse, repeat until you get the socket you want. Eventually, there we go. And then you're going to go 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3 until you get 4 socket Triad Grip here. And that's basically going to be one of your endgame items. I could keep going until I get it, but you guys get the point. We're all smart here. That's how you're going to acquire the 4 green Triad Grip. Triad Grip is basically a 1C item, and as soon as they come on the market, you should be acquiring them. And after you do acquire them, that's when you want to get into your Arcanist brand action to really turbocharge both your Carrion Golems and your Skeletons, because they'll now be doing 100% cold damage. I haven't included Elemental Equilibrium and Avatar of Fire in this, because I'm not entirely sure when you guys are going to be picking up the Triad Grips and coloring them like that. But once you do, you should definitely be going for them. And in my leveling cheat sheet here, there is going to be a small adjustment you'll need to make. If you go for the Triad Grip Carrion Golems, you're going to want to sub out these 3 support gems for more cold focused support gems, which you can find in the path of building for endgame. So you're going to use stuff like hypothermia, you're going to use stuff like added cold damage, and that's all going to be shown in just a minute here. All right, let's move on to the next point here. All right, let's open the path of building back up. We'll go through more of the leveling stuff here. So this is the mid leveling here. We're not going to take any bandit. You're going to kill them all for extra skill points. The first ascendancy point here is going to be mindless aggression for additional, attack and damage speed for all that stuff like that. It's really, really good. And you're going to focus on making sure you get the Golem Commander node when you hit Act 4, and you can acquire the Carrion Golem. And that's going to be really good for you guys if you follow the cheat sheet. All right, lastly, let's get to the late leveling here. This is kind of what the skill tree looks like here. You're going to want to start picking up some Abyss Jewels now, and that's going to be really, really good here. You will notice that there's a slight respec that you're going to have to do. You'll have some refund points to do this, but you're going to try and pick up some Abyss Jewels when you're around Blood Aqueducts and just starting to get into maps and getting your Cruel Labyrinth. It's going to be incredibly important to getting big, big damage. All right, when you get into early mapping, here is what you're going to want to look for. You're going to want to look for either going for a cluster setup or a no cluster setup. I reckon going with a no cluster setup is probably better for most players because, you know, it's much easier and much smoother. All right, so the uniques that you're going to need to look for are, of course, the uniques we're all used to. You're going to be getting those Triad grips. You're going to want to pick up as many of the Abyss Jewels as we talked about as possible. You're going to want to get a Darkness Enthroned, sock those Abyss Jewels in them. If you can't get any of these items, swap them out for Life and Resist. It's not a big deal. The only one that's a massive deal is Triad Grip, and the following item we're about to discuss. Victario's Influence is very important. So Victario's Influence is where a lot of your damage is going to come from, and where you're going to get hard carried throughout yellow and white maps, and even red maps for your damage. So picking this up and getting it to a 5-link state is going to be incredibly important before you can get your Soulwrest staff. And the reason for this is we're going to socket a 5-link carrying golem in there, which is going to be really good. And you can see here that we have a number of support gems on there, and you guys can peruse the gems here at your leisure. It's fairly similar to Soulwrest, but we're focusing far more on carrying golems as a source of damage because we don't have access to the Soulwrest staff until later when we can acquire the currency to purchase it. So until then, you're going to be playing skeletons with Summon Carrying Golem, and that's going to take you a long way, and it's going to be really good, all the way up into red maps. So you're going to be able to blitz the red conquerors. The only thing you probably won't be able to do is endgame bosses, and maybe you won't be able to do the very high-end conquerors without the Soulwrest staff, but it should be pretty good. Let me explain the playstyle. So you'll have your Carrying Golems coming along with you. You're going to have 4 total after you pick up 2 Clay Shapers, which are about 4 or 5 C on day 1, and these are going to be your primary weapon while you're waiting for your Soulwrest. You're going to blaze through your maps. You're going to have your Carrying Golems, which are going to come with you. You're going to be convocating them on cooldown, and you're also going to be summoning skeletons out, which are going to be in one of your weapons here, which are going to have Infernal Legion on them and minion damage. Infernal Legion is basically a damage over time equivalent to like a Righteous Fire, which is going to absolutely decimate all monsters in white and yellow maps and hard carry you. And it's also going to hard carry you through the story as well. If you guys check out TyTy Killer's leveling guide, you're going to see just how potent it is. It's crazy. So yeah, it's going to be really good. So yeah, you're going to be summoning the skeletons for the packs, and then on the bosses, you'll summon all your skeletons as well. But on the boss, with exception, you're going to be putting an Arcanist brand on there, which is going to activate Desecrate, Flesh Offering, and also trigger your Elemental Equilibrium, which is what we talked about earlier. Incredible damage, which is going to be really good. 5 links aren't very hard to acquire. They're definitely not very expensive, and Victario's Influence is definitely not a rare item. So yeah, it should be fine. If you can't get a 5-link, sit on a 4-link for a bit. You don't lose that much damage, and it's going to be certainly going to be enough damage for white and yellow maps. You might need the 5-link when you start to get to red for the single target, but it should be all good, and I wouldn't worry too much about it, and that's going to be really good for you guys. All right. So in the ultimate endgame, it's very similar to the Soulwrest build. After you take Mindless Aggression, you're going to pick up a Natural Strength, and then after that, you're going to get Commander of Darkness to fill out your resist after you kill Kitava, and then you're going to get Bone Barrier. And this build overall is going to hard carry you all the way through maps until you get your Soulwrest. Now, of course, if you hit a wall with this build and you need to farm currency, it's okay to do so. I'd recommend doing expeditions and trying to leverage the vendors to get enough currency to buy your Soulwrest. That's basically all you need to do. After you do so, you're going to be in charge. Large and in charge. All right. Let's talk about a few things at the end here. Closing thoughts. This is a crazy build, but there's a few things to consider. So the first one here is going to be Mana Sustain. So Mana Sustain is something that's up in the air. We're going to be using an Enduring Eternal Mana Flask. That's going to help. And we'll also have the option to use Clarity, which can also help as well. All of our mana costs are incredibly low, even in the mid-game. You'll notice that our skeletons are on a 3-link. We don't have to spend additional mana for our Carrying Golems. The Arcanist brand is reasonably priced as well. So overall, we should be fine, but the clarity is there if you guys need it. Next, I want to talk about coloring Soulwrest. Similarly to the gloves, it's a little bit difficult, but it isn't overly difficult. All you need to do is go to the bench, and you need to use the craft 1 green, which you can get from Delve. Just by going in a Delve, you'll get it and acquire it. Use 1 green, use it again and again and again and again until you get 2 green and 4 blue. It's not too bad. Final point here, we'll be talking about at the very end of kind of the progression line here, you may want to go for a hungry loop. Hungry Loop essentially allows you to have zombies at your disposal, and these zombies will be able to apply Feeding Frenzy and also Elemental Army to enemies. Elemental Army is a 10% elemental penetration buff for your phantasms, and Feeding Frenzy is essentially going to grant you the buff for free on this ring slot instead of having it on your Carrion Golem. And then on your Carrion Golem, you can instead put Culling Strike. So the net result of using a Hungry Loop is having 10% elemental penetration, a few more minions on the field for defense, and also it's gonna give you Culling Strike. And the catch here is, though, that you need to sacrifice one of your rings. So you need pretty damn good resistance on the rest of your gear to be able to make up for the ring that you'll be dropping. But this is a very, very endgame option and is really only available to those who want to push the build a little bit further. It can do all content without the Hungry Loop, and I wouldn't be too worried about that. So that's going to conclude my Summon Phantasm League Start build guide. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed. If you have any questions, definitely post down below. I'll be answering them all before League Start. If you enjoyed this guide and you're looking for more content, definitely make sure to subscribe. Sorry it was so long, but I had a lot to cover. With all that said, guys, hope you guys have enjoyed. See you in League. I'll be on Twitch TV if you want to tune in live. And with all that said, guys, I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.